Good afternoon, dear students. Today is the fourth lecture in this series, and today I'll be talking about the second aspect of research design and methods, that is developing hypothesis for a hypothesis type of research. So, as I discussed in the last lecture, research methodology has several components, which I had given in the form of a list here. And we discussed the formulation of the research problem, which in fact also needed an extensive literature survey. These two aspects were covered in the last lecture. Today we will discuss on development of a hypothesis plus some more aspects for different types of research. Apart from the hypothesis driven research, there are other types of research that also we will discuss some of the examples of that. Okay, so we have discussed the research methods. Research methods are the tools or the different methodologies, the models, the simulation procedures that we use to carry out the research. These are the research methods. And in that, we will discuss how the hypothesis-driven research is carried out. So what is the hypothesis? What do you mean by this? So I make a statement of the hypothesis. The hypothesis is a statement about the universe. It can be any event or any cause and effect, cause and result relationship happening in the universe, and it can be true or false. So, and we are trying to investigate the truth of that hypothesis. So whether the statement is true or false, the hypothesis can be valid in both the cases. In fact, it is said that the valid hypothesis must be falsifiable. Usually, you'll have two mutually exclusive options in a hypothesis, at least two mutually options. And so, if it is valid, then this is true. If it is not valid, then something else is true. So we should be able to show that the hypothesis can be falsified or not. And when we say that the hypothesis is valid, then it meets the rules for being a hypothesis. That means we can carry out the research using this as a hypothesis, irrespective of whether it is true or false. That is immaterial, but the hypothesis should be valid. So when you are carrying out a research and you make a hypothesis, then you should be able to convince yourself that it is a valid hypothesis. Whether it is true or false, that is a different issue. But if the hypothesis is invalid, so you can give arguments in the favor of invalidating a hypothesis. So if it is invalid, it breaks the rules and should not be considered. Now we are talking about hypothesis-based research. Why so specific about hypothesis? So if you see the history of this different types of hypotheses, you can find that this hypothesis-driven research was designed to protect the research against subtle biases that can distort research outcomes and are particularly difficult to avoid when life and health are at stake. In fact, during this corona period, you must be hearing a lot of results which have been derived from testing of different vaccines, and then the vaccines say this is so much % effective. So this vaccine is effective against coronavirus, COVID-19 too. That is a statement. That's a valid statement, valid hypothesis. It may be effective or not effective. That is a true or false of the hypothesis. But the important point is that you can verify that whether the hypothesis is valid or not. So many of the hypothesis driven research is carried out in the field of medicine. When you have, like you must have seen there are several medicines in the market, and that medicine has come out of a lot of research where the doctors or the scientists have studied extensively the efficacy of the vaccines or the medicines. So during the carrying out the research using those drugs development, they always have the hypothesis in mind. This vaccine or this medicine works on for this disease. So that is where the hypothesis criteria, and also to protect the medical people, so when a person is undergoing operation, doctors, they are not very sure when the operation is done. There are many critical type of operations, and the chances of survival of the patient are also, not 100%. So that time the doctors will tell the relatives of the patient that one has 80% chance, that the surgery has 80% chance of success, or 90% chance of success, or 95% chance. So there is an element of failure associated with that. So that data that has come from the statistical analysis of the data, and we will discuss this in the subsequent lectures, how this data are arrived at, that what is the success rate, what is the failure rate of a particular operation or a hypothesis. So suffice it to say that in particularly in those areas where the data have a lot of implications in the life and health of the people, the hypothesis is made, because there is nothing is 100% sure about the outcome of that work. So it is not that every researcher has to have an hypothesis. One has to decide where you need a hypothesis, and in many cases it may not be required also. So I have just given two aspects of it. Like, when is the hypothesis research most appropriate? The hypothesis driven research is most appropriate if the researcher is trying to decide between a small number of exclusive cases. That means either this will happen or that will happen. For example, which medicine is better? So many a times doctor may prescribe this medicine or that medicine, and both the medicines may have their own side effects. So when you, even nowadays, in fact, you yourself may go to the internet and see what are the side effects of a particular medicine. So you will see that both the medicines we can compare. So there, when if you do a research in the laboratory, which medicine is better, you can say, make a hypothesis. A medicine is better than the B medicine, and then do the research. You can do on the patients and see the results of the treatment. Similarly, whether the consumption of a particular substance causes cancer, this is you can make a hypothesis. The answer could be yes and no, or to what degree. You will come out with the quantitative data also, that if somebody consumes this particular substance, then he has this much chance of getting cancer, or this much chance of not getting cancer. So all this kind of research where you have 2 or 3 options, very few options, outcomes of that study, that we can say is a hypothesis driven research. But there are many examples where you don't expect this kind of exclusive outcomes. When you have multiple outcomes, large number of outcomes, like when researchers is trying to find out between a vast number of possible cases, then you have a lot of options. There is no point in making a hypothesis. For example, you want to know the density of a rock. Okay, so you are measuring the density of a rock. You are doing a measurement of a quantity, and the rock density could be anything. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6, or 3.5, 3. So you have a large number of options. So you cannot say the density of this rock is 2.00, because you have multiple options. So there is no point making the hypothesis about a quantity that you are going to measure, and when you have large number of options. So there is no need of an hypothesis in this case, as the density could be any number. So that is why it is not that every research that one does in the laboratory has to have a statement, hypothesis statement. But depending upon the type of research that one is doing, one can make a assessment whether the hypothesis needs to be made. And hypothesis actually, in fact, gives you a lot of guidance when you make a statement. See, it's like a generalization. So hypothesis essentially is now you are adding new knowledge when it is not known what will happen to the outcome of this research. So you make two options, either this will happen or that will happen, and then do the research. Then you will see that we will learn from this hypothesis driven research. What is the outcome of this research? So you have to decide in what kind of research you need to make a hypothesis. Just to give you some very early examples of at least some statements where you can discuss whether it is a valid hypothesis or not. For example, the statement says eating 2 tablespoons of olive oil twice a day decreases the odds of getting heart disease. Now, you must be having dadi maa ke nuskhe. Many things we learn from our grandparents and parents at home, that eating this is better for health and this thing that. So how that has come? That has come from experience of our elder people for a lot of hundreds of years. So they will always advise you, don't eat that, or eat this and that. So this is a statement which is a hypothesis, and it is a valid hypothesis. Like either it will decrease or it will not decrease. So this is the kind of. So later on we will discuss the null hypothesis. You can say it does not decrease the odds of getting heart disease. It's a null hypothesis, and then you do the experiment, and whether the null hypothesis can be rejected, whether it decreases or not, you can verify. So what essentially one does to validate this hypothesis, to check, confirm the hypothesis, it can be checked by randomly assigning large number of people's diets that contain or do not contain 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So you take the randomly large number of people, and to some of them you give the diet that is representative of 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and other group does not, you don't give that kind of treatment, and then monitor their health over a long period of time. In fact, very often you will see this kind of outcomes in newspapers also. This has come out of a research done by people, and then you know that this helps in your health also. Like you will see many nutraceuticals in the market. They say this is good for this is good for that. So like that how that has come about? That has come about by carrying out research, making a hypothesis, then to do the research and see whether the hypothesis can be true or false. But this is a valid hypothesis. It can be confirmed. Similarly, in other branches also, like in physics or chemistry, you can have hypotheses like, for example, the gravitational force between two masses is proportional to the products of the masses and decreases exponentially with the distance between them. So there are two statements. So it's a valid hypothesis. First one is a valid hypothesis, but it is also false because gravitational force decreases at the square of the distance and not at the exponential. So when you are making a hypothesis, to make sure that it is a valid hypothesis, one has to read the literature and see that conceptually it is correct hypothesis. Then only you should proceed ahead with the experimentation. So how do you conduct the research that is driven by a hypothesis? So when you start, first thing is to make a statement of the hypothesis. So you state the hypothesis, and to state that hypothesis, it is understood that you have done a lot of literature survey. So it is like when you formulate a problem, after the formulating a problem, you have done literature survey, and then third condition is that you make a hypothesis. So once you make a hypothesis, then you design the experimental procedure to test this hypothesis. So that experimental part we will discuss in the subsequent lectures. So you may that experimental procedure may involve constructing an apparatus, or it may require some modeling, or different types of experimentation. And then you perform the experiment. Then you analyze the data from the experiment to determine how likely it is that the hypothesis can be disproved. So there is a lot of statistical analysis of the data to prove to whether it is the hypothesis is true or false. This is how the research will be carried out. And if it is so, it may so happen that suppose it is not coming true, then you may have to refine and correct the hypothesis and continue if it is necessary. So it is not that you make a statement of a hypothesis, carry out experiment and close the chapter. A hypothesis may generate many other hypotheses, and you will see when you write the abstract, or when you go to the introduction of a paper, when you write the paper, you will find that paper contains many hypotheses which have been verified by the previous researchers. So, for example, just to give you an example, when you do an introduction of a paper, suppose you are working on a fission problem, low energy fission. Now you write in the introduction that the low energy fission of actinides gives you the mass distribution which is asymmetric. So maybe 50-60 years back, a nuclear physics scientist must have done experiment to prove whether the fission is mass asymmetric or not. So, but now it is a common knowledge, and so we say the nuclear fission, low energy fission of actinides is asymmetric. The mass distribution is asymmetric. It has become a common knowledge. So as a result of hypothesis, generate some knowledge which is general, is applicable in all scenario, and that becomes the new knowledge for the subsequent generations of researchers. So it's a very important that hypothesis, for example, I make a statement that the sun rises in the east. Now, maybe hundreds of years back, somebody must have tried to make an hypothesis, sun rises in the east. And then he proved that, yes, sun indeed rises in the east. So that is how even the planetary movement and all that research people have done based on a hypothesis. And now it is a common knowledge for us. So hypothesis research is very useful, and it tells us about our knowledge of a subject. So we have to develop a hypothesis. So how do we develop the hypothesis? We will also see some examples of that. So before starting the actual work, like performing an experiment, or it could be even theoretical calculation or a numerical analysis, we expect certain outcomes from the study. So for that outcome, whatever outcome we are expecting from our research, we will say that we make a hypothesis. That is our expectation from the research, that this is what we are expecting. So hypothesis, what is hypothesis? It's a scientifically reasonable prediction. So we expect some outcome of a research. We predict this is how this system should behave. So that is how we start making our research problem, formula research problem. So most often you will find that we state the hypothesis in terms of, if we do this, then that can happen. Like if then, or a cause effect, means because of this something can happen. So if we take, like if we add A plus B, C will be formed. See, like, so A plus B react to give C. So the different chemical reactions are now developed based on, again, the hypothesis. Similarly, like this previous statement I mentioned, 2 tablespoons of olive oil decreases the chances of heart attack or cardiovascular diseases. It is a cause and effect. So taking the olive oil daily is a cause. Effect is that decreasing the heart attack. So that kind of a effect or cause and effect one can see in a hypothesis. So if you are going to start a research based on a hypothesis, first you do extensive research survey of your relevant literature, learn the present status of the field of research, and then you make the hypothesis. Because it may so happen that your hypothesis may be invalid if you have not read the research literature properly. After you have understood the subject and you are trying to add some new knowledge, that is what you are predicting based on your literature knowledge, then you formulate this based on previous research and observations. And when you are doing the experiment, essentially you are testing the hypothesis, whether the hypothesis is true or false. So you don't think that if the hypothesis is false, it is a bad research. It is never a bad research because there could be many unknown uncertainties. So when you are trying to do a research on a hypothesis, whether it is true or false, most important part is whether the hypothesis is valid or not. A hypothesis may be valid, but it could be true or false. But if a hypothesis is invalid, then there is no point doing that research. So when you test the hypothesis, you find either true or false. You explain the phenomena. So suppose you say this cause effect does this effect. This is a hypothesis. If it does not give that effect, then other one also may be true. Then this cause does not give this effect. So both aspects are there, but the hypothesis has to be a valid one. I will give you a very interesting example. It's like anecdotal example of a faulty experiment. And that is what happens if we don't know, if we are not conceptually clear about the hypothesis. So this hypothesis says that the bug can listen. Now, see, the scientists want to prove that the bug can listen. The experiment that he makes is not proper. You can see here. The scientist asks the bed bug to move, and the bug moves. One leg of the bug is removed, and he again says move, and the bug moves. He again removes another second leg and asks move, and the bug moves. So on. And fifth leg is removed, again say move, and the bug moves. But when the last leg, the sixth leg is removed and say move, the bug does not move. And he feels that the bug cannot listen, and all legs are removed. So you see a conclusion derived out of a faulty experiment. So this should not happen. So and that this can happen if you are not very much aware of the subject. So always see that whatever hypothesis we are making, we are doing a proper experiment to prove the hypothesis. This is a very funny example. In fact, Professor Siena Rao actually narrated this example in one of the lectures long time back. So this is a classic thing. So if you have a hypothesis, then we should know what proper experiment to do to validate the hypothesis. Okay. So what are the criteria of a good hypothesis? A good hypothesis should have conceptual clarity and a theoretical orientation, because ultimately out of that research you are going to make some statement that will become a general statement, that will become a new knowledge in science. So it should have a theoretical orientation, basic understanding of phenomena. It should be stated in a simple way so that it can be tested by the investigation. So if I make a statement and I do the experiment, I should state in such a way that other people can also do the experiment in their own laboratories. The hypothesis should have at least two variables, like I said, cause and effect. So an independent variable is cause, I do something, and the dependent variable, that is the effect. So x, y, you can say like x and y. I vary x and I measure y. Hypothesis gives us the opportunity to discover the existence of an unknown uncertainty. So this is what is important, that you don't expect that every hypothesis, whatever we are predicting in a hypothesis will come true. It may so happen that we have not factored some of the uncertainties which we do not know. And so we come to know those unknown uncertainties, and then that also becomes a common knowledge. for subsequent generations of researchers. In fact, Poincare writes in his book on in Science and Methods that a scientist must utilize a few hypotheses. So don't take a research problem where you have so many hypotheses, because it is very difficult to find wrong hypothesis in a theory which makes use of many hypotheses. So if you are having several hypotheses, then you don't know which one is wrong. So the hypothesis should have only two options, maybe maximum three options, like positive, zero, negative. It can happen. Three options can be there. I'll give you that examples very soon. So some of the good hypotheses, examples of good hypotheses. Here, see, higher the altitude, higher the rainfall. So it's a very simple statement, and one can travel, one can go up the altitude and measure the rainfall and draw a correlation between rainfall and altitude and confirm whether the hypothesis is true or false. Smoking increases the chances of lung cancer. So you can do a survey of people who smoke, and also you have to have a control sample of people who don't smoke. And then you monitor their health for a period of few years and come out with the statistical data whether people who are smoking have a higher chance of getting lung cancer or not. And you know that already presently it is known that people who smoking does indeed increase the chances of lung cancer. Ice cream melts faster than ice. You can devise a nice experiment on melting of ice and ice cream. This is another very interesting research problem. Eating millets with low glycemic index controls blood sugar. And that is how in the market you will see a lot of nutraceuticals having low glycemic index, or many cereals which have low glycemic index being promoted for the diabetic people. So a lot of research has gone, and this is how you add new knowledge into the research. But then there are examples of bad hypotheses, like Pepsi is better than Coke. No, this is not a hypothesis. This is not a proper hypothesis. This is a statement, but there is no cause and there is no effect. So this kind of hypotheses are not proper ones. Will fertilizer make a lawn grow more? So this is not a hypothesis. It is a question. It is not as a prediction. So when you make a statement of a hypothesis, it should be in simple and it should be giving you options. So these are not proper hypothesis results. Okay, so I give you a couple of examples of hypothesis-driven research. Our biology friends may know about this aspect. Like this hypothesis says, ionizing radiations enhance mutations in crops. Now, if you have to test this hypothesis, what you have to do? So here, what is the cause? Cause is the radiation dose. You give radiation, gamma irradiate the seeds with gamma rays, and effect is you see whether the crops that you get out of these seeds, whether they have mutations in them or not. Now, so you take the seeds, for example, this wheat seeds, irradiate with the gamma radiation. The gamma radiation may introduce genetic changes or not. It can be the changes can be positive. A negative mutation means it is retarding the effect of growth. It can be no mutation, and it can be positive mutation, means it will enhance the mutation. So there are three options. As I mentioned, that instead of two options, you can have three options. So if you want to test that they enhance mutations in the crop, when you sow these seeds in the field, then you pick up the ones which are having positive mutation. How do you know? So you selectively, you first you show them the plants that will grow and you see their characteristics. What are the characteristics? Like maturity time or the yield. So the yield is higher, or the size of the grain is higher. This kind of traits are there. There are many traits. Maturity time is less, yield is high, size is bigger, and so on. They are resistant to diseases and so on. Now, whether it is mutation has been generated or not, we don't know. So what you have to do, you select the ones which are having the better traits. You again put them in to generate crops out of those selected seeds. And like that, you have to have 5 to 6 cycles of showing the crops and then see whether they have developed the mutations. The mutations have got stabilized or not. After that, you will find that you have developed a genetically modified crops which the mutations have been stable. So this statement to prove this statement, you require about some 3-4 years of research to confirm, and you as a part of that you also generate a mutant variety of the crop which one can send to farmers for multiplication. Like you know that already our Department of Atomic Energy have developed in fact almost 50 crop varieties using ionizing radiations. So this statement is a true statement. Ionizing radiation does enhance mutations in the crops, but then when you so it is not that it will always enhance. It can also do negative mutation. It can do no mutation, but it also enhances the mutation which you can use to multiply that particular variety of crop. So this is how you can do research in agriculture and test the hypothesis. So crop improvement is based on two basic principles: genetic variation and selection. So the radiation causes genetic changes, and then you select the ones which have the proper traits and multiply them. Another example that I have taken is from the nuclear physics. In nuclear physics, you have this heavy ion fusion reactions. So heavy ions like, this, you have carbon, and carbon 12 and carbon 13 are the projectiles, and targets are tantalum 181 target. And there is a reaction called incomplete fusion. In incomplete fusion, a part of this projectile, carbon 13 or carbon 12, will break up, and remaining part will fuse with this target nucleus. So this is called incomplete fusion. The complete fusion means the entire projectile will fuse with the target. Don't bother about the details of the physics behind this. I want to highlight that there are two processes: incomplete fusion and complete fusion. And incomplete fusion means projectile, a part of a projectile fuses with the target. Now this process, incomplete fusion, probability depends upon projectile structure. So we have taken two projectiles having different structure, carbon 12 and carbon 13, and studied the fusion with tantalum. And what I plot here, projectile energy and the fraction of incomplete fusion with the total cross-section, total fusion. So you see here, the carbon 12 is having higher cross-section than carbon 13 at the same energy of projectile. So, and it is statistically different. So the error bars for the carbon 13 and carbon 12 are shown. So this is a testing a hypothesis that yes, incomplete fusion probability indeed depends upon the projectile structure. So now this is the statement which is true, and the future literature physicists will make this as a statement in their introduction that incomplete fusion probability depends upon projectile structure. So that is how you start with a hypothesis, and once the hypothesis is tested, it becomes a common knowledge for the future generation. So that is how you have to do the experimentation. A lot of experimentation will be required in this, but outcome of this is like the outcome of the hypothesis research. So I will also touch upon different types of other types of research, like you are measuring a value. So this is not a hypothesis type of research, but it is a measurement type of research where you are doing a measurement of particular quantity in the research. So a lot of research will be of this type. So you want to define a particular quantity, you want to determine what you want to measure it. To identify a well-defined quantity which you want to measure, like charge of an electron or the mass of a neutrino, electronic neutrino, and so on. Design a procedure to measure that quantity. After that, you perform the experiment. So this is like, the research design. What you will be doing chronologically, you have to write the steps of the research that you will be doing to measure the quantity of interest. Then after the experiment, you analyze and report on the accuracy of the result. So this is the steps involved in carrying out experimental research for measurement of a particular quantity. Some of the examples of that measurement of a quantity, like density of crystalline silicon at room temperature. So you are asked to determine the density of crystalline silicon at room temperature. So this is a state. It's not a state. It's not a hypothesis. It's a measurement of one quantity, and it can be obtained by separately measuring mass and volume of crystalline samples and taking the ratio of mass to volume. So you can perform experiments on density of different types of materials. Similarly, the charge of electron you want to measure, like Robert Mulliken did experiment in the early 20th century. For the first time, measured the electron charge using the oil drop measurement. The distance from the Earth of the nearest star other than the Sun. Already the Proxima Centauri is like 4.22 light years from Earth, which has been published by NASA in 2008. So this value has been measured experimentally by the physicists. Number of base pairs and distinct genes in human genome, somebody has to measure. So it has been measured. Number of base pairs is around 3 billion and number of distinct genes is around 30,000, and they are obtained from Project Genome 2008. So you can have, in fact, mega projects to determine the particular quantity. And so it is not that everything is hypothesis based research. There are research based on measurement of one quantity, and they are also having profound effect on the future of the science. Another type of research is measurement of a function or relationship, experimental research. It could have some overlap with the hypothesis based research because like cause and effect can happen. So, but I thought it is also categorized as a different type of research. It may not necessarily have a hypothesis. So observe a phenomenon and develop testable questions. Identify. So this is the chronology of steps that you have to perform. Identify the control variables. So the important point here is that you have a control variable and you have a response function. So you like independent and dependent variables. You have that in hypothesis based research also. So design an experimental procedure to vary the control variable. It could be more than one variable also. Measure the response variable and keep other factors constant. Then you perform the experiment and then analyze the relationship between the control variable and the response variable and characterize the relation mathematically. So you may ultimately get a mathematical relationship between the dependent and independent variable. And so you are bringing in again new research, new knowledge. Some examples are like this. So the function or relationship is find how the speed of sound in air at fixed pressure depends upon air temperature. So this is the relationship between speed of sound in air and the ambient conditions of pressure, temperature. So the control variables are, let's say, temperature. Response variable is speed of sound. And like you will have a large number of experiments of this type in physics and chemistry. Like for example, pH. pH depends upon temperature. So you have temperature varying and determine the pH of a solution. Like that, you have innumerable such situations where you are doing study of cause and effect, and you arrive at a relationship between uh, independent and the dependent variable. Another example is place a fluid between two cylinders, rotate the outer cylinder, and find the state of the fluid as a function of rotational speed. So you have the control variable is the rotational speed of the outer cylinder, and the response variable is the state of the fluid, like whether it is the smooth, uniform motion, or it can form rolls, or it is a turbulent motion. So this is like fluid mechanics. Our engineer friends will appreciate this kind of experiment one can do in the laboratory and generate the relationship between the rotational speed of the outer cylinder and the fluid situation. Similarly, another example is measure the stiffness of a rubber as a function of cross-linking agent. So you can make the rubber stiff by using sulfur or by irradiating with the gamma ray out electrons. So the control variable is cross-linking agent like sulfur or radiation dose, and the response variable is stiffness. So in industrial research, this is widely used. So how much, like, you want to find out how much radiation dose is optimum to, first of all, you want to confirm whether the radiation causes stiffness of rubber. So you can make a hypothesis also. Radiation causes stiffness in the rubber. Now, this is the state, it's a hypothesis, and you can irradiate the rubber with gamma radiation, find the mechanical strength of the rubber, and then confirm that yes, the hypothesis is true. And subsequently, you generate a relationship between radiation dose and the cross-linking. So you plot stiffness versus radiation dose, and you generate a mathematical relationship, which you can use later on to generate a particular stiffness. So you know how much dose you have to give to the rubber. So this kind of experiments are also very common in industrial research. Then there are researches based on constructing a model, like in theoretical science or applied mathematics. So you choose a relationship discovered through experimental investigation. So you want to make a mathematical model which will predict the behavior of certain objects. Like then you construct mental pictures to explain relationship and develop hypotheses about origins of the phenomena. Identify basic mathematical equation from which the relation might result. And using analytical or numerical techniques, determine whether the experimental relationship results from basic mathematical equations. For example, this what I call as the mass formula. I mentioned about this semi-empirical mass formula. So how to predict the mass of a nucleus of particular proton number and neutron number. So you have hundreds of nuclei. So there are about 275 nuclei which are stable, and you can measure their masses. And then you want to predict the mass of another nucleus. So you make a model. So one of the models is semi-empirical mass formula. So based on the liquid drop model, you devise equations for the mass of the nucleus in terms of different parameters like volume term, Coulomb term, surface term, and so on, and determine the constants of those terms empirically from the known experimental masses. So this kind of a research, you are constructing a model to predict the mass of a nucleus which is not known. So this mathematical equations will help you in predicting unknown quantities. Whether if it is incorrect, find a new mathematical starting point and so on. And if correct, then predict new relationship to be found in the future experiments. So that is how one can proceed in the theoretical experiment, theoretical calculations and mathematical modeling. Like, here I have given some examples of that. Again, that between a fluid is placed between two cylinders with the outer one rotating, and calculate the rotational speed at which steady fluid motion becomes unstable to form rolls. So this computation, in fact, was first carried out by Taylor in 1923, and they are called the famous Navier-Stokes equations, and they constituted the first non-trivial comparison of theory and experiment for fluid motion. So when you do this kind of research, you generate new laws, new phenomena like Faraday's laws, electrolysis. So you pass some current, how much material will deposit, you do not know. But by Faraday's law, you can predict. So most of the laws, they have been generated because of this thinking and experimentation. Find the arrangement of atoms in DNA. It's an excellent model. And Watson and Crick in 1953 determined the structure of DNA as a double helix with a schematic diagram. So the model structure of DNA was proposed by them. Similarly, find the weather in your city 2 days from now. So weather forecasting. So how our this atmospheric scientists predict the weather forecasting is done. A large amount of data is collected from weather monitoring stations around the globe, and then using the equations of motion of air, including temperature, pressure, and humidity, they compute the conditions and then predict how the weather will be on a particular day from now. So you see here, gradually over a period of time, the weather forecasting is becoming more and more accurate. Earlier, I remember during monsoon, the meteorological department will predict rain tomorrow, it will be the other way around. But now the predictions have become very accurate, quite fairly accurate, I would say. And so this, you can see the effect of the advancement in computers, that the daily common man's life also getting affected. Because if you are able to predict the weather more accurately, people can plan their day properly. In fact, I find that in Europe and USA, they can even predict whether this snowfall, there is something called flurries, instead of the snowfall, then some flower-like objects fall down. So their flurries, they even predict the flurries will happen at that particular time. So excellent advancement in the modeling of the weather. Then we have certain research called observational and explorative research, which also leads to new knowledge. Any research leads to new knowledge, and it will definitely be very, very useful to mankind at some point of time. But some of the research actually is for fun also. We'll see that example of that. So for this kind of research, create an instrument or method for making observations that have not been made before. So you can make an instrument or you can devise a method to make observations. Carry out observations recording as much detail as possible, searching for unexpected objects or relationships, and present the results and stimulate further research. So this is a very innovative type of concept, that you observe around you what is happening, and from that you develop some concepts and explore the universe or the phenomena. Like here, for example, so much of knowledge about the universe has come about from this observational research. So the statement is find how the position of Mars in the sky varies over times of minutes, hours, days, and years. If you have been gazing the stars in the night in summer in your courtyard, then you will see that position of the stars and planets over a period of time keeps on changing. And so it is a outcome of, so it is, in fact, much of it is known very accurately now. So it seems that Tycho Brahe was a astronomer who measured in late 50s. He measured the motion of these planets in the sky and gave lot of generalizations how they move. And then later on, his student Kepler, in fact, interpreted those results, and which played a critical role in the development of modern astronomy and even physics and mathematics. So, in fact, we say our Jyotish, no, Jyotish Shastra, and we have our Panchang in India, which accurately predicts the position of all our planets in different constellations very, very accurately. So, how it has been arrived at using observations. So that is called observational research. Similarly, Darwin's theory of evolution. Travel to Corbett, I given instead of this one, I just mentioned that one can take up this research by traveling to a wildlife sanctuary and make careful observations about wildlife. And similar observations were made by Charles Darwin. He went to the wildlife on Galapagos Islands during 1831 and 1836. And what he observed that a particular birds called finches, they had beaks. They could adopt their beaks to different food supplies in different regions. So he observed that these finches in different regions have adopted their beaks depending upon the type of food that is available to them. And that is how he gave the theory of evolution. So it is a merely an observation, but it gave to such an excellent theory of evolution. The other day I was telling about the spines on the sticklebacks living in the vicinity of trouts in a lake. Developed, the spines are become larger. Similarly, use MRI to map the regions of activity in the brain of a patient undergoing epileptic seizure. So this is a known that functional MRI produces the images rapidly enough that it can even provide information on the state of the brain during specific activities. So it is out of the curiosity of our scientists or doctors slowly by the excellent machine like MRI using NMR, you can probe what is happening in the brain in a dynamic situation. So like now this PET positron emission tomography, dynamically you can image the picture of the brain, what is happening inside the brain. So these are all a part of observational research having large implications. One of the very interesting example, I got it in 2 weeks back in Times of India. It appeared. I thought I can share it with you. So I was just reading the newspaper, and this title is "Fit and Tipsy, a Question." That means there is a relationship between cardiorespiratory fitness and alcohol consumption. Take it in a lighter vein, but mind you, it has been published in Medicine and Sports Exercise Research Journal just very, very recently. So a lot of research was done by doctors in USA. About 4,000 American adults were studied, both men and women, and they concluded that fit people are more likely to be big drinkers. This outcome of a study involving 4,000 American adults with quantifiable low, moderate, and big drinking. So it is such an exhaustive study. They found that those who drink more, it is not that if you drink, you will be fit. It's the other way around, that if you are doing lot of exercise, then you tend to have more drinking. So they are fit and they are drinking also. So they are enjoying their life. It is not to convey that if you drink more, you will be fit. So, but it has got a lot of, predictions, and one can, it is just an observation. So it is not a hypothesis. I would say it should not be taken as a hypothesis that if you are fit, then you should drink more or you drink more. But a correlation has been observed by observational research that you are more likely to drink more if you are doing exercises. So it is, when they say fit, they were doing a lot of physical exercises. That is what they mean by it. So you can read this. In fact, it is an example of how the statistical conclusion had been drawn. What I am what appreciated is that even in this article, they have given a lot of information, what statistical inferences they have drawn from this observational research. So there are different other types of research, like improving a product or a process, in industrial and applied research. Like you identify the market need for a product. So you are developing some products. So then you design the product with the potential to meet the need. Then you build a prototype of that product. Then you determine whether the products function as desired. And then based on that, you optimize the product with respect to the cost, the speed, environmental consequences, and other factors that affect the profit. And then later on, you bring the product into the market and continue. So a lot of industrial research is devoted to bringing out new products in the market. You will see in the Amazon several types of products coming up in the market, and we do use them in our daily life also. For example, and not only in daily life, you have a lot of developments also, like create a device from semiconductor materials capable of amplifying electrical currents. So the transistor is a classical example of that, which resulted from intensive 3 years research at Bell Laboratory, Bell Telephone Labs in late 1940s, which was led by William Shockley and John Bardeen, and ultimately leading to sprouting in the electronic industry. Similarly, create new small molecule inhibitors of protein kinase B as anti-cancer agents. This 2005 business agreement between AstraZeneca and smaller firm Asterix for specific goal-oriented nature of drug designs. Similarly, write programs that regulate or control scientific instrument through computers rather than physical knobs and switches. So most of you may be knowing about LabVIEW. It was first released in 1986 by National Instruments USA after 3 years of R&D. It's a complete programming language and involves control of scientific instruments from a circuit diagram drawn on a screen. So this is another research, it has large scale impact. So lastly, we have applied areas of research like library research. So it is rightly said that it is futile to move very far through a project without attempting to determine whether the answer is already known. So people are doing research in library research. How libraries have developed now. You see now you have digital libraries available. And so a lot of people are working on developing libraries. Pure mathematics, very, very important. And I have taken some quotes from some book. An engineer thinks that his equations are her equations are an approximation to reality, whereas a physicist thinks reality is an approximation to his or her equation, and a mathematician does not care, because much of the pure and abstract mathematics was developed because of the desire to solve scientific problems. So mathematicians, the physicists or mathematicians, engineers, all of them, they are doing research in their own way. Then you have computer science and computers. So computer science is no more about computers, Then astronomy is about telescopes. Computers have come into everybody's life now. They have changed the way science is practiced in many ways. So a lot of research is done even in different other areas also. So that's all I have to say. So if you have any questions, you can write in the chat box. I'll open the chat box. Okay. I would like to request you that while giving examples, please give some examples relating to social sciences. Okay. So let me see, maybe I will have some examples in statistics on social sciences. Subsequent lectures, I'll keep this in mind. Okay. How to check validity of a hypothesis? Can it be done without detailed experiments, or who will check it, guide or researcher? See, the hypothesis has to be tested by the researcher himself or herself. So the hypothesis testing is a part of research. So when you make a hypothesis, to check the hypothesis, to test it, you devise experiments. So it is all a part of your research work. I will give you examples later on that in the hypothesis-based research, you are making a statement which is like, which you want to test. So you do experiments to test that hypothesis, and it is like in your conclusion, when you write the conclusion of your paper, essentially you are giving the outcome of your hypothesis testing. Okay. Kindly explain difference between invalid and false hypothesis. Okay. So when I say invalid hypothesis, means this hypothesis cannot be tested. When we say a valid hypothesis is invalid, it is cannot be tested. You cannot make a hypothesis which is invalid. You cannot do research on a hypothesis which is invalid. But a hypothesis which is valid can be true or false, and both of them will give you new knowledge. That is the difference between the two. Can hypothesis research an extension of observational research? Yes, very true. So they are not independent. Many of the observational research, like I mentioned, that the fish in the lake, the pond, fish in the pond. So that is a part of observational research of evolution. But we can make a hypothesis about the spine length of the spines in the stickleback. So you will have see a lot of overlap between hypothesis and different types of research. You tend to hypothesize when you observe a pattern. Yes, very true. So when you observe things, you will develop a hypothesis. So there are overlaps between hypothesis and other research also. I would like to request you that while giving examples, please give some example related to social sciences. Okay. So there are many such requests coming. I'll try to include them in subsequent, at least some examples I will see whether I can include this social science based research. Okay, what is the difference between observational and experimental research? So every observational research may not be experimental research. Like astronomy. In astronomy, you are observing the position of stars in the sky. You are not doing any experiment. But so it is like all observational research may not be experimental research, and vice versa. What about wrong observational results like alcohol consumption is proportional to fitness, ignoring other parameters? Yes. So it is not that, So this is, when that paper is published, they are not making any conclusion. They are making a statement that those who drink more, those who are fit, those who do a lot of exercise and are physically fit, they tend to drink more. It is not, they are not advising that you drink more. So these are all observations. and one should not get carried away by those observations. So one has to take it in the right earnest that whether it is useful or not. But there are research going on different types of phenomena. Everything need not be taken for our own consumption. Difference between statement and comment. Okay. So I showed some tables actually. On the left hand side, there were examples of statement of different types of research. Hypothesis type research, observational, cause and effect relationship, measuring a value. And on the right hand side, I had given comment, means I have given some examples of that or historical perspective of those statements. So it was like in a discussion in a tabular form that this is the statement of this kind of research, and in the past there have been outcome of this type of research, so that it's given in the comments. Yeah, comment is like, tested. You are testing that statement in the comment. So when a hypothesis is true, is it a statement? So hypothesis, you are making a statement. It could be true or false. Even if it is false, it can be a statement. So hypothesis is a statement which could be true or false, but the hypothesis should be valid. That means it should be falsifiable. So there could be both aspects of a hypothesis. It could be falsifiable. It could not be falsifiable. So you can ultimately a large number of research will be based on hypothesis, which we will also discuss in subsequent presentations. Even the statistics also, we will see that how do you test a hypothesis using statistical means. So falsifiable means a null hypothesis is rejected. So when you say a null hypothesis, like A leads to A causes B effect, this is a statement. Now null hypothesis, A does not cause effect. Now when you say falsifiable means we reject the hypothesis. That is what we will. I think we will have more examples of this with quantitative data in subsequent lectures. So, shall we form a hypothesis first, then collect the data and test it, or yes? You make a hypothesis first, then collect the data and then test it whether it is true or false. So that is how we do the research. Excellent. Nice to see so much of interest in the students, and you can still write to me in my email ID bstomar1957 @gmail. Okay, so we will close here, and we will meet on Wednesday again, 4 o'clock. Okay, bye bye, and all the best to you. Okay, there is one question. Why is de Broglie's hypothesis still a hypothesis? Is hypothesis not justifiable? What to conclude from it? So there are a lot of questions coming. I will yeah. So we will discuss in the next one. Okay, bye for now.